All right. Okay, there we go. All right, I'm recording. And again, my name is Derek Eisenbach. I'm from the Bureau of Land Management, Arizona State Office. I'm a project manager there for our renewable energy program, and I'll be leading tonight's meeting on the Phoenix District and Gila District solar variances. This meeting is scheduled to run till about 6:30. Some of us may be able to hang around a little bit longer if questions go over. We'll be looking at 3 presentations tonight being presented by Primergy and Copia, the developers behind the Yellow Cup Solar Project in the Tucson field office, the TAP Solar Project in the Lower Sonoran field office, and the Thistle Solar Project in the Hassayampa field office. These are at the application stage right now. On this slide here, I just want to kind of talk through some of the information I have here and make sure everybody understands what's going on. I'll be reviewing this again before we depart, as well as putting some links over into the comment section. Or the chat box, I should say. So the presentations you'll see tonight, as well as this video, will be put up onto our e-planning site or the project website. So I've got the link up there, and we're going to put this link over in the chat box so you can click on it. And we'll do that towards the end of the evening. That way it doesn't get lost in any comments that we get over in the chat box. So there'll be the e-planning site. If you go to documents, you'll be able to navigate to where these projects are sort of laid out. And for each project, you'll see a couple of documents. One called a preliminary plan of development, really is a little bit more of a technical document of outlining what the concept of the project is right now, its size, location, technology, stuff like that. There'll be a variance factors analysis report, which is more of a discussion of potential resources, kind of a desktop survey of how the project may impact other land use and resources on these public lands, and there'll be a GIS file as well. So if you work with Google Earth or a GIS software, you're able to bring that in. Additionally, we will post the PowerPoint presentations up there as well. And if anybody has any issues with accessibility, let us know, and we can get something that will be accessible to you. So, but this will be the place where you can download them, and look for that. Hopefully by tomorrow morning or tomorrow close of business, we'll get them up there as soon as possible. We are going to be taking comments. Written comments and email comments are best, just so we have them. But tonight will be a good opportunity for some Q&A and to share some brief comments in this venue. Your written comments can come to me via email. I have the email address up here. And again, we'll put this into the chat box. And of course, you can get to this email off of the e-planning site. You can also send things to postal mail. I've got a couple of names up here. So this is me, Derek Eisenbach, in bold up there. You can reach me at BLM_AZ_PDO_solar@blm.gov. So that's a great place to send comments if you have any. I am typically working with Selena Martinez. She is working on another project this evening and unable to join us, but her email is there if for some reason you're not getting a response from me at that inbox. Matt Dranick out of the Phoenix District Office. He is the project manager there. He is currently acting as an assistant field manager. He can be reached as well. And any correspondence sent via the post office can be sent to attention Matt Dranick at the BLM Phoenix District Office, 2020 East Bell Road, Phoenix, AZ 85022. We will have comments open till May 15th. Really appreciate you getting your comments in sooner than later, so nothing gets lost. I'll talk a little bit about the process and how your comments will be incorporated into things. Before we get going here with the presentations, I'm going to go and forward a slide here. And I want to talk a little bit about what it is that brought us together. So just a fair warning to people, this is a little bit of policy, and this, some people love it and some people hate it, but I want to get through this so for those of you who understand what it is that we're doing here. So BLM, like most land management agencies, whether it's your county or your city, we have a responsibility to plan for the lands under our management. That plan comes out of the Federal Land Policy Management Act. That's about 45 years old now. And we have what's called RMPs, resource management plans. And they're not that much different than, say, your county comprehensive plan. It lays out the lands under management and more or less gives management objectives or states what you're allowed to do with those lands as an agency. So it's kind of like a zoning plan in that regard. And back in 2012, BLM undertook an amendment, a programmatic amendment. So basically amending all the plans within the 6 southwestern states to account for solar energy development. And this is called the Western Solar Plan. It was published in 2012. You may also hear it called the Solar PEIS. What came out of this amendment were some zones, basically, on like how to treat solar energy and how to consider it. It divided up public land in these 6 states into exclusion areas, solar variance areas, and solar energy zones. I'll start with the exclusion areas, and I highlighted this in red because these are kind of like the no-go areas. And so the plan identified lands under BLM management that would not be suitable to host for solar energy. These are things like your national conservation lands, so you like your areas of critical environmental concern, national monuments, national conservation areas. There are other resource considerations in there, like critical habitat or archaeological sites, sacred sites. We could go like on and on, but all told, about 32 different criteria came up, and these were no-go areas, so exclusion areas, no solar allowed. Then there were these green areas, I say, like this is really what was like zone 4 solar, if you will. And these are your solar energy zones. In Arizona, we have 3 of these. One of them is near Yuma, near Dateland, actually, and that's called the Agua Caliente Solar Energy Zone. We have one near the town of Arlington, that's the Gillespie Solar Energy Zone, and one out near the town of Brenda called the Brenda Solar Energy Zone. All 3 of these areas have projects committed to them right now. So there are leases in effect for the Agua Caliente and the Brenda solar energy zones. We're looking at projects in there. The Agua Caliente one is in NEPA, that's called Elizabeth Solar. And we have received a plan of development to consider for the Brenda area one, but we've not started NEPA on that. The Gillespie Solar Energy Zone was not leased, but picked up via non-competitive application. And so that is a part of a bigger project called the Vulcan Solar Energy Project, and that is in NEPA as well right now. So those solar energy zones, for all intents and purposes, are filled up in Arizona. And what's left is this big area called solar variance areas. And these are areas that are not explicitly designated for solar, nor are they excluded. So they are, I guess you could put it this way, available unless otherwise excluded. And when I say that they're variance in this variance process of what we're in, is really kind of a check to make sure that some of those exclusion criteria, which are kind of dynamic, like there may have been new designations or changes in inventories or something that we found since 2012 that would take a solar variance area and bump that into an exclusion area. So that is really kind of like the most fundamental purpose of what we're doing here right now is actually checking that out. There is also, frankly, a need to do some pre-application screening and both inform BLM as well as the project developers, as well as the public of what's going on right now. So that's why we host these meetings to try to get an assessment from the public. We've also hosted meetings today with sovereign tribal nations and with other land management agencies that we typically consult with. And they all come together and share some perspectives and information as well. And this informs the project in some early project design considerations, as well as build a little bit of momentum as we go into technical study phases for NEPA analysis, which is our formal permitting process. So I want to just kind of clarify a couple of things right now and make sure everyone's on the same page. There's no decision before BLM right now, that full force and effect decision that comes at the end of a NEPA permitting process. That's not before us right now. What we're doing is essentially a pre-application process. The culmination of these meetings and the comments that you may provide, as well as the review that we're taking as an agency internally, informed by consultation with sovereign tribal nations and input from our partner agencies, all get pulled together into a memo that will actually be circulated up to the BLM director for her review and concurrence. And after she reviews and concurs that these areas, these variance areas are still available, we will proceed with NEPA analysis, which is our formal permitting process. That would culminate in a decision. And with NEPA, there are all kinds of public participation opportunities, including formal scoping periods, review on draft period, draft documents, and of course, appeals process as well. So that's really where we're at right now. It's kind of like in our very early stage type stuff. I also want to point out, in addition to the Western Solar Plan, which gave us this process, we also have some Arizona-specific planning called RDEP. And what we did, a Restoration Design Energy Project, or RDEP. And this came just after the Western Solar Plan was published. And this refined criteria for siting just for Arizona. And so one of the things that came out of RDEP was an elevation of areas called Renewable Energy Development Areas, or REDAs that we call them. And this is kind of like an overlay zone, if you will, on top of variance lands that our partners who worked on RDEP here in Arizona with BLM identified as areas that would probably have the least amount of resource conflict. So these would be lands close to transmission. They may be previously impaired, like old agricultural lands, or catastrophic wildfires sort of destroyed the ecological values out there, or other low potential for resource conflicts. And those are sort of scattered all around Arizona. And I bring this up because there is a project in the pool tonight that is cited in a REDA, and a number of the variance projects that we've analyzed before this are in those REDA areas as well. The rest of RDEP really doesn't come into play until NEPA, when I say we sort of implement that plan and actually help design the project. And Restoration Design Energy Project gives us some help. But before we can get to NEPA, we've got to do this variance process, and that's what we're doing here today. So before I move on, let me just stop and see if there's any questions on that policy lecture I just gave you before we get into the show. And if you have any questions, you can raise your hand or put something in the chat. Is probably the best way to do it, is click on the chat and say, I have a question, or just type your question in there. And if I don't see anything, we'll just keep on moving, and there'll be plenty of time to come back to questions on this. All right, I'm going to move forward. So layout of the process, typically we do a pre-application meeting with applicants. It's kind of like a very early screening, and that is done with all these applicants before they even apply. Once we get into the application, we don't accept the application. It's kind of like a formal term, but that's where we're at right now, is a solar variance process, kind of the extended pre-application process before we accept these and move into NEPA. We would expect concurrence on these projects. We'll at least send them to the director for her review. She'll concur when she gets to it, but we would expect that in around summer 2024. So sometime in mid to late summer on this. Following that, we would begin internal work to plan for NEPA. So this involves like baseline research. The project developers will refine a plan of development or their proposed action, and we will get to work on setting a schedule for NEPA. That may start in fall 2024 if these projects go. There's a lot of work in Arizona, so it's really a matter of finding time to get this all queued up. There's a lot of work for all the developers as well. So that is not done until it's done. But when it is done and NEPA is ready to get started, we would start NEPA analysis. Typically takes about 18 to 24 months. Public scoping meetings, public comment periods, lots of opportunity for public engagement. So what I always say is, like, after tonight, the things may go dark for a while. You may not hear these projects ever again. You may not hear about them for a year or two. Doesn't mean that there's not work that's being done on them. It'll just kind of be behind the scenes. But when it does come back, it will be in a big public process and a big public rollout when these things come back, if they come back. All right, so with that, I want to move along here and get into the project presentations themselves. We are going to start in the Tucson field office and take a look at the Yellow Cups solar project being proposed by Primergy. We've got representatives from Primergy and their consultant, SWCA, and I'm going to turn it over to them right now. So let me stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Toby and Megan. Feel free to introduce yourselves and we'll get going here. Thanks.
Thanks, Derek. Yeah, my name is Toby Tuttle. I'm a Director of Development at Primergy Solar. I'll be presenting along with Megan Dugan from SWCA. Megan, if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so Primergy Solar develops, builds, owns, and operates energy storage and solar projects across North America. We focus mainly on utility scale solar, photovoltaic, and large scale battery energy storage projects. Our flagship project, Gemini Solar, is a 690 megawatts solar and 380 megawatt battery storage project on BLM administered lands, administered by the Southern Nevada Field Office. And the project is an example of the way Primergy approaches project development. The construction of Gemini sets standards for stewardship of land, construction practices, and partnerships with local communities and stakeholders. We don't just talk about our commitment to environmental stewardship, we embrace it in everything we do. That goes from our construction processes to the way we help our customers meet their renewable energy objectives and the way we are aiming to protect the planet. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background. Our company is a portfolio company of Quinbrook Infrastructure Partners. They operate and invest across the United States, United Kingdom, and Australia. All the companies you can see listed there at the bottom of the slide have specific expertise and specialties within the renewable energy space. Primergy Solar is the US-based utility scale solar developer. And then the map here shows the areas throughout the country where we have projects currently in either early, late stage, or current operation. So the states that are shown in gray are the states where we are looking at and developing projects. A lot of them are in the early stage. The dark colored markers are locations where we have current operating or under construction assets. And then those shown in the lighter colored markers are those that are near term projects that are targeting construction in the next few years. All right, so this is the overall agenda of our presentation today, and the items we will cover throughout the presentation between myself and Megan. So Megan, if you'll go to the next slide. And then the next one. So high level overview, Yellow Cups proposes to develop the project within unincorporated Pinal County on approximately 5,173 acres of land administered by the BLM Tucson Field Office. And a portion of the project is located within the White Canyon Resource Conservation Area. And our proposed project will be as large as 500 megawatts of solar and 500 megawatts of battery energy storage. We are currently evaluating two separate generation tie lines. So you can see the line going to the east northeast and the line going south. The one going east would connect to an APS, the Saguaro to Cholla 500 kV transmission line via 10.6 mile 500 kV gen tie. And the one going to the south would connect to the Tucson Electric Power TP Pinal Central to Tortolita 500 kV transmission line via an 8.5 mile gen tie. Either of those two gen tie corridors would pass through land administered by the Arizona State Land Department, so we would also coordinate and work with them as well. And just as high level project goals, it's to benefit provide clean energy, add living wage jobs to the county, additional tax revenue to the county and to the area, and it also supports the various state and BLM decarbonization goals that are listed there. All right, I'll run through the components of the project at a very high level. So the main portion shown on the maps that we had on the previous slides and coming slides is where the PV area will be, as well as the battery energy storage system. The PV system would be panels mounted on single axis tracking systems. And then we would also have a project substation within the area, as well as the generation tie lines. We would have one of the two APS or TEP tie lines. And then the other component would be the ancillary components, the access roads and facilities that would be needed for operation. And then as far as a high level review of the construction process, the first part of it is sometimes years before construction, equipment orders will be placed and manufactured off-site and they're ready for transport to the project site. And the first actual physical work on site would be initial erosion control measures that would be put in place prior to any disturbance of land. And then the first real construction of the project would be any necessary grading and vegetation management to accommodate the installation, as well as construction of staging areas throughout the project, as well as an operation and maintenance building. And then we would also construct the tie lines and any roads, access roads, along with the construction of the PV system. And what we have shown in the pictures here, you can see one that's an example of an existing road within the project area. And then the picture on the right is the East Florence Kelvin Highway that abuts the northern boundary of the project. So the project would be entirely south of that. And then just a high level project requirements during construction. So one of the main things would be water use. We'd need approximately 900 acre feet of water during construction. That would be used primarily for dust suppression, filling water trucks. And then as far as the workforce, it would fluctuate throughout the project. On average, it would be about 350 workers, but it could be as many as 600 during peak installation. And as far as vehicles, we would work with the various local stakeholders to determine the traffic routes, the various roads that we can use, and the roads that we would maintain throughout the project in order to minimize the impact to the local communities. And then the long-term requirements of the project, we would need water approximately 9 acre feet annually for panel washing. Those would happen about twice a year. And then we would have an operation and maintenance facility on site. There would be about 3 to 5 full-time equivalent people there on site. And but the amount of vehicles, that will vary based off of what type of preventative maintenance, what type of repairs or are needed during operations, but definitely minor compared to what would be occurring during the construction phase. And this slide shows our assumed or our anticipated project schedule. So you can see right now we're in the variance process, and kind of as Derek mentioned, we are aiming to work through this. And once we get approval to this, that will kick off the NEPA process. And that is where the in-depth studies will take place, where we will look at and firm up our design. And Megan's going to cover a lot of what we have looked at so far and what we are what we are anticipating to look for. But the project timeline, as far as the construction is assumed to be between 2026 and 2028, with COD at the end of 2028.
Thanks, Toby. I'll take it over from here. I'm going to present an overview of the resources that were looked at and decided to be presented in detail here during this meeting. So a couple of the high-level reviews that were done were to livestock grazing, land use and recreation, vegetation and surface waters, wildlife, cultural resources, and then visual resources. So stepping through, Primergy has already completed a number of desktop analyses. These include a critical issues analysis, which is a preliminary desktop evaluation of a variety of resources and permitting needs, as well as conducted a site visit. And then as part of the variance process, Primergy has completed a variance factors analysis report, which is a desktop evaluation of 22 factors outlined in the Western Solar Plan 2012 PEIS. And it's referred to oftentimes as a VFAR. So the VFAR also has included 4 different technical appendices for review, and those include regional and local biological resources, cultural resources, and then a visual resource desktop evaluation. And this is available on ePlanning. Future analyses, if a variance is approved, will include a biological evaluation, vegetation surveys and special status species surveys, water resource surveys such as delineations and studies regarding hydrology, cultural resource surveys, visual resource evaluation, and a technical report following BLM handbook guidance, and any other studies as determined necessary by the BLM to inform the NEPA process. And the results of these studies could result in revisions to the alignment of transmission lines and or refinements to the ultimate design of the solar project. Obviously, the project area is larger than is ultimately needed, and that is the intention of that is to allow for design around potential conflicts with different resources or uses. So the first land use that we want to touch on is livestock grazing. The project area is located within portions of 5 grazing allotments that are administered by the BLM and the Arizona State Land Department. However, the solar facility, which is the portion of the project that would result in change to land availability for grazing, because solar facilities are typically fenced and therefore livestock cannot access it, would include the Box O allotment. So the solar facility and associated infrastructure that would require fencing would be located on approximately 4,061 acres within the project area, which would encompass up to 8% of the Box O allotment. Regarding the genties, the gentie either option crosses portions of Box O, A Diamond, Coyote, Deepwell, and Teacup Ranch allotments. However, the gentie is not an exclusive use, and livestock would still be able to access forage in those areas. Therefore, construction would result in temporary disturbance and loss of forage, but it would be on less than 1% of any allotment, likely much less than 1%. As required by BLM grazing regulations, the BLM must notify permittees at least 2 years in advance of any proposed agency change in allotment AUMs, and that is the amount of livestock that may be grazed in any one allotment at any time. We also want to note that there is grazing infrastructure that is present within the project area, and Primergy would work with the BLM and the grazing permittees to either avoid impacts to infrastructure, relocate infrastructure, or work on a compensation strategy regarding loss of infrastructure. Again, detailed evaluation of potential impacts on rangeland resources and availability for livestock grazing would be conducted during the NEPA analysis. Other land use and recreation is summarized here. So as touched on previously, land use in the region that the project area is located on is primarily grazing and dispersed recreation. In the general region, though, you do have surrounding scattered low density rural residential development. There's a lot of mining activity in the northeastern portion in what is often referred to as Arizona's Copper Triangle, as well as transportation and transmission infrastructure. So we have a number of roads. We've got State Route 79 that would be crossed by the TEP Gentie corridor. And then the East Florence Kelvin Highway is located just north of both the proposed solar facility area as well as the APS Gentie corridor. There are a number of transmission lines that are crossing through here. You can see there's a designated utility corridor up in the northeastern portion, as well as other transmission infrastructure, and then a couple EPNG natural gas pipelines down in the south and southeast. The East Florence Kelvin Highway does provide a popular scenic driving route, and we're going to touch on visual resources later in this presentation. But we do want to note it does not have any special designations. However, it is a popular route to drive through the desert. The project area does not contain any developed or designated recreation sites, and it's not located within a special recreation management area, but we do know that there is recreation in the region, including privately owned guest ranches and a privately owned campground in the general vicinity. The Pinal County Comprehensive Plan and the Pinal County Open Space and Trails Master Plan identifies BLM administered lands in this region as major open space. And this indicates that Pinal County is interested in preservation, but further study and coordination is required. I will note that county land use planning designations do not apply to federal lands. So therefore, this designation has no regulatory authority. There is also a Pinal County proposed multi-use trail corridor that follows the just north of the East Florence Kelvin Highway, as well as a proposed OHV trail that is a little bit further north of East Florence Kelvin, but neither of those are located within the proposed project area. Additionally, the Ripsey Wash passage of the Arizona National Scenic Trail is located approximately 2 miles east of that easternmost end of the APS Gentai corridor, right amongst where you have a lot of that mining activity. And then again, detailed evaluation of impacts to all of this types of recreation, public access, and land use would be conducted during the NEPA analysis. Regarding vegetation and surface water within the project area is located within the Arizona Upland subdivision of the Sonoran Desert Scrub Biotic Community. This means that there's a lot of trees. There's a pretty high density of vegetation, as well as a pretty high density of large cacti, such as saguaro cactus. There's actually quite a bit of saguaro in this area, as we'll continue to touch on. There is one listed endangered plant species that may occur within the project area, which is called Acuna cactus. There is designated critical habitat for this species present along the APS Gentai corridor. It is called the Box O subunit or Box O Wash subunit, and it is located on Arizona State Trust and privately owned lands. Again, as I mentioned before, there are going to be additional considerations regarding alignment to avoid, mitigate, or minimize any potential impacts to special status species, sensitive habitats, etc. So Primergy is aware of the presence of this designated critical habitat. In addition to Acuna cactus, there are 12 other species protected under the Arizona Native Plant Law that were documented within the proposed project area, including the aforementioned saguaro cacti. Surface waters are limited to those associated with earth and stock tanks, which are primarily filled with water following precipitation events and are not perennial water sources. And then ephemeral drainages, some of which are pretty large. Generally, those large washes are located along the Gentai corridors, and they can be spanned by the transmission infrastructure. They generally flow to the northwest to the Gila River, which is located approximately north and west, 7 miles north and west of the proposed project area. You have a photo here on the slide showing Box O Wash, which is the largest wash that crosses the project area, and it is located within the APS Gentai corridor. In addition to earth and stock tanks, there are about 791 acres of the project area that is mapped as a Zone A special flood hazard area, otherwise known as floodplains. So these floodplains would be avoided by project design for infrastructure. However, access roads and collection lines may need to cross. In addition, impacts to vegetation would be reduced to the greatest extent possible by options such as minimize the project footprint and implementation of design features, which could include avoidance of sensitive plant communities and implementation of that environmentally sensitive construction techniques such as mowing instead of grading. Vegetation and species specific surveys would be conducted as part of pre-NEPA baseline study process, and then the results of those studies would inform any needed avoidance, mitigation, and monitoring strategies that would be developed with the BLM and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service during the NEPA process. Regarding wildlife, the project area intersects 2 Pinal County landscape movement areas that have been identified for Sonoran Desert Tortoise and Cactus ferruginous pygmy owl. You can see those here. One is red and one is yellow on the map. They both cross generally the APS Gentai corridor, which again, as I mentioned before, would not be fenced. And then I do want to mention for Cactus ferruginous pygmy owl, while the project area, this is a listed threatened species. While the project area is within the historic range for this species, the current known range of the species is actually much further south of the project area, with the most current modern occurrence of the species being recorded in the Ironwood Forest National Monument. In addition to wildlife movement areas. The project area does contain suitable habitat for monarch butterfly, which is a candidate species for listing under the Endangered Species Act. And I believe a decision on the listing of the species is expected in later this year in 2024. There are 12 BLM special status species that may occur in the project area, which also includes Sonoran desert tortoise. There is, the BLM categorizes habitat for Sonoran desert tortoise based on a ranking system, and there's category 3 up again in the northeast in the more mountainous regions. And category 3 habitat is typically representative of more of a dispersal habitat for Sonoran desert tortoise and maybe not necessarily representative of core populations. However, it is indicative that the species may be present. And again, as mentioned earlier, saguaro cacti provide habitat for numerous species, including BLM special status species and nesting birds. As a result of the presence of the potential for impacts to wildlife species, and movement corridors, potential effects would be reduced to the greatest extent possible through coordination with the BLM, Arizona Game and Fish, and other wildlife agencies, and including through implementation of design features such as design that considers wildlife movement needs. Species-specific surveys would be conducted during pre-NEPA baseline study phase, and that would inform, again, the need for any avoidance, mitigation, or monitoring strategies, and these would be developed along with BLM and the wildlife agencies during the NEPA process. Regarding cultural resources, only approximately 4% of the project area has been previously surveyed. Within this previously surveyed area, there are 5 known archaeological or historic sites. So based on that, it is likely that additional cultural sites may be present within the rest of the project area. Of these sites, 3 of which are historic. So that includes the old Florence Road, the State Route 80, which is also State Route 79, and one existing very old transmission line. So of these 5 sites, 1 has not been evaluated for the eligibility for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. And that is one of the archaeological sites. 1 has been determined to be eligible, which is State Route 80 / State Route 79. And 1 site has been recommended eligible, that is an archaeological site. 2 of the 5 sites have been determined to be ineligible, and those include Old Florence Road and the old transmission line. So I've got a screenshot here of State Route 80. That's what it looks like. It is regularly maintained. And then initial consultation by the BLM with interested tribes is being initiated. And then the BLM would continue to engage in Section 106 consultation throughout the NEPA process if the variance is approved. As part of pre-NEPA baseline studies, a sampling survey strategy would be developed probably to evaluate the density of cultural sites in the project area, and then additional surveys would be conducted. So in-person, on-the-ground surveys would be conducted within the proposed project footprint. The results of those surveys would again be used to develop avoidance, mitigation, and monitoring strategies during the NEPA process, as well as with input during the Section 106 consultation process if there is the potential for resources to be impacted or other resources that are not able to be recorded during surveys, such as sacred sites or traditional cultural properties. And finally, we'll look at cultural resources. So there is a detailed desktop analysis of the baseline conditions and available data, as well as some evaluations of sensitive viewpoints. And this is available in Appendix H of the VFAR. You can see this map on the left side is what is called a view shed. So that is the total area around the solar facility itself, not including the transmission lines, and it's a heat map of where it can be viewed from. So the project would be viewed largely from the east, looking down where the elevation's a little bit higher, and then it's a little less visible, as you can see in the blue areas, in areas closer to the project, such as along the East Florence Kelvin Highway. The right side of the right map is showing the BLM's visual resource inventory data. So all the BLM administered lands within the project area are classified as visual resource management class 3, which is a classification that provides management objectives for visual resources. And in class 3, only a moderate level of contrast is considered acceptable. So it is currently unknown whether or not the development of a proposed solar project within VRM class 3 would be in conformance with the BLM's management objectives with that classification. You can see on the left or on the right map here that it is in VRI class 4, which means that there's moderate sensitivity from viewers such as recreationists and local residents, and then people traveling along the roads in the region to visual contrast. The BLM would need to conduct a visual impact analysis to determine if the proposed project would be in conformance with VRM 3, or if the BLM needs to undertake a RMP amendment to change the VRM class from 3 to 4. 4 allows for major modifications to the scenic quality of an area and allows for a lot of contrast. Similarly, mitigation strategies for visual resources would be developed during the NEPA process to reduce visual impact.
All right, thank you, Megan. Thank you, Toby, for that informative presentation. While our next presenters get themselves ready, we'll open it up for some Q&A on the Yellow Cups project. And if you need some extra time to think of questions, don't worry, we will still be taking questions about Yellow Cups all the way through the end of the meeting. We'll kind of do a go back there at the end. But if you have some questions that are burning right now, feel free to type them in the chat. We actually have a little question and answer. If you look at your toolbar, you'll see Q&A, but you can put them in the chat, raise your hand any way to let us know you have something to say, and we'll get to you. All right, we've got one in the Q&A. Ed, how can we raise our hand? I think you'll see a reactions button down there, Ed. And if you...
Yeah, I do see that, Derek.
Oh, but there's not a raised hand, I guess. You have to...
Exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, well, how about you wave to us? How about that?
Okay. Well, maybe since I'm unmuted, can I go ahead and ask the question?
Go for it. It's the floor is yours.
So I appreciate Mr. Tuttle's presentation, and but unfortunately, with Jim and I spent a lot of time commenting on that project. And when we first saw it proposed at the scoping level, it was wonderful because you were going to survey twice the area where that was needed for the footprint. And but then when the tortoise surveys were done, the entire eastern half of the proposed Gemini survey area really lacked a lot of tortoises, and we suggested that the project footprint be moved to the east, but that suggestion was ignored, and the western area that was originally intended was developed, and consequently many more tortoises were displaced. So how that relates to this, I appreciate Megan, thank you for your presentation, that you show this site being located in what you also refer to as an important linkage or corridor area for the tortoise. And I noticed that if you were immediately north of East Florence Kelvin Highway, that you would be avoiding that entire thing. So I just, it always concerns me that proponents come in with a single footprint, that they don't have alternative footprints. And so I guess my question would be is why not locate it north of the East Florence Kelvin Highway so that you completely avoid that corridor or that linkage habitat?
Thanks, Ed, for the question. I will direct this to Toby, and maybe you can share a little bit about your thought process that goes into selecting a site. And then I can follow up a little bit about the way we can present alternatives in NEPA. So Toby. Go
And
ahead.
I can clarify, and I can maybe clarify. So what you're seeing here in pink is the important connectivity zones, which was a desktop exercise that Arizona Game and Fish undertook that essentially modeled least cost pathways between habitat blocks and is not necessarily representative of the existing conditions on the landscape. The corridors that we're looking at is actually for Sonoran Desert Tortoise is this yellow that you're seeing, and then the red at the very northeastern corner. I know it can be a little, I don't know if that's what you were looking at, but I just wanted to share that clarification.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Let's see, I have another question here from Laura. Her question is, what sort of compensation or mitigation would the applicant offer grazing permittees for the loss of AUMs in range? And I can step in and talk a little bit about this from a regulatory standpoint. BLM by regulation requires compensation to any lost range infrastructure and improvements that are made and would be lost as a result of another BLM authorization. So those are appraised, and there would be payments made to the permittee for the loss. It would be an appraisal and kind of a transfer of funds to that. In terms of any other compensation or mitigation, that would be something that we would encourage permittees and developers to negotiate between themselves. BLM is not a party to that, and I just want to make that very clear. We encourage private parties to come together and find a resolution on impacts that may affect their interests. But that's not something that BLM would get involved in. I appreciate your question, Laura, but it may not be the best time to talk about essentially what would be a negotiation between private parties. I hope that answers your question a bit, but I think that if you reach out to Primergy, they'd be more than happy to kind of discuss negotiations that they've been in, with other permittees on other projects. Is that fair, Toby?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, once the variance is approved, that's kind of when we would start going down that path of the negotiations and really extend our outreach and really start coordinating with the permittees.
Cool, thank you. The next question we have from an anonymous participant. Why was BLM land selected for the project rather than state land in the project area? I don't have an answer for that, so let me send that over to Toby to see if you have an answer again on kind of some of your logic on site selection.
Yeah, I mean, aside from the BLM land being the best we evaluated in the area, that's the best we have. That was the best site we evaluated.
Yeah,
we did evaluate other sites within that area.
Yeah, and I can't speak for Primergy, but I'll offer this to a lot of folks who do inquire. Generally the site selection follows sort of market demand, and so where there may be opportunity to create an interconnection to address market demand, so substations or major transmission lines with a capacity, and then a distance to there, which is a major cost factor for development for utilities. And then there's the site conditions themselves, which having visited the site myself, the site is relatively flat in an area where there's topography around it. And so looking at the actual expense to develop a site is another general consideration. So these aren't necessarily particular to this given site, but oftentimes that factors into the plans that developers are putting together. Thank you all for your questions. I want to bring up the next presentation. Oh, we got one more here. Ed has a comment. Does BLM want comments for all three projects in a single letter or three different letters? You can put them all in one single letter because we're sort of looking at these, not collectively. Each one will be its own package, but they're all coming to me. So you can just put it together in one letter. Thanks. So we will have time to come back to this project if there are lingering questions, but I want to make sure that the others have an opportunity to present theirs. So let's go.
Eric, I did
also-
receive a question via direct message.
Oh, sure.
And that is from Kevin. Do large desert microphone trees get shredded for those projects? If so, how do they get shredded for these projects? How many are on the site? How many?
I'm sorry.
Things?
What trees?
The person says microfill.
Oh, yeah, microfill woodlands, sure. Well, for one, I don't think we have an inventory of what vegetation would be impacted yet. It's not something that we really keep tabs on for all our vegetation. We do have some information, but we haven't picked that up at that kind of granularity yet for this. If the project moves into NEPA, that would certainly be some baseline study. It would be looking at the microfill woodlands for their value as a vegetation community, but also as habitat for wildlife. When we go into development, and this is something that may help a lot of people understand how we approach things in NEPA, we look at alternatives and we look at different design alternatives. If there's high value habitat or there are areas of vegetation, we look to of sensitive vegetation. Those areas may be spared from development in certain design alternatives. There may be some sort of mitigation. It's really, I don't want to say unknowable right now, but it's kind of getting ahead of where things are going. And I'll also say this, traditionally, a lot of solar projects have been essentially scrape the landscape, blade it, treat it, so there is no vegetation, and then, kind of make it a parking lot and then put solar panels on it. What I've seen from a lot of developers is a move towards less destructive areas inside of a fence line, allowing connectivity through washes, preserving areas of vegetation, no build areas, multiple blocks of development rather than one big block of development. These are all things that I think have precedent around the industry that we here at BLM look for when we go into design alternatives, but we're really not there yet. And so it's hard for me to kind of discuss what the inventory is out there without knowing it and exactly how a project design might impact that inventory. All right. So I do want to move along here and bring up the TAP Solar Project, also in Pinal County, and I'm going to call up Dallas with Copia Power and turn it over to you, Dallas. Take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Derek. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. My name is Dallas Pugh. I'm Director of Permitting for Copia Power. Tonight, I'm going to be presenting on the TAP Solar Project located in Pinal County. Quick agenda. These are the talking points for tonight's presentation. I'm going to go over some basic introductions of the team and a brief overview of the company before we dive into the TAP project itself and the affected resources and issues. And then we'll bookend the presentation with just a quick snapshot of where we think we are with the project schedule and where we're headed. On the phone is obviously myself, Director of Permitting for Copia Power. Nikki Payne with Environmental Resources Management is unable to attend this particular meeting, but she has been our main consultant on all environmental resources. So Copia Power is an integrated renewable energy platform with the capabilities to drive and execute value creation across all aspects of project development, construction, and operations. Copia is a relatively young company that was formed by Carlyle in March of 2021 to bring high value-add renewable development expertise and execution capabilities, but under a single platform in the United States. We currently have 60 projects nationwide with a 35 gigawatt pipeline and about 55 to 60 full-time employees. The team is comprised of solar industry veterans with decades of combined experience. We pride ourselves on being great environmental stewards of the land and prioritize avoidance of natural resources as much as possible. We support transparent communication with agencies, affected stakeholders, and communities, and work really closely with those surrounding communities to tailor community benefit programs. And we support early and often de-risking of project constraints for more sophisticated and streamlined development. And currently, we are constructing the 450 megawatt Harquahala Sun solar facility in Maricopa County. The COPIA team includes former leaders from other major developers in the industry, including Clearway, AES, formerly S-Power, Recurrent, and SB Energy. Collectively, we've developed over 3,700 megawatts of PV and BESS projects across the Western US. And to the right side of the screen, you can kind of see a snapshot of that development portfolio. So diving into the TAP Solar project, currently it's slated for about 300 to 400 megawatts of PV solar, plus an additional 1,000 megawatts of BESS in unincorporated Pinal County. Our interconnection position is at the TEP terminal at the Pinal West substation. Approximately 1,450 acres are slated for PV solar, with an additional 50 acres slated for BESS. You can see the red outline there to the right is what we're proposing for the PV solar. The area, smaller area outlined in blue, just southeast of the Pinal West substation, is what we're slated for our standalone BESS. There's only an approximate 0.8 mile gen tie that's indicated there with the dashed line from the BESS area up to the substation, and then from the solar array, which is almost adjacent to the substation, a little bit north of there. We have an estimated commercial operation date of December 2028. And kind of in light of what I was talking about earlier about early and often involvement and agency coordination, the project footprint has been drastically reduced since our original submittal of our SF-299 application and preliminary plan of development to avoid resources such as the railroad and the ACEC to the north, the 10% slopes and associated Category 2 desert tortoise habitat to the east, and the designated energy corridors to the west. So the site layout and components are industry standard. PV solar arrays with single axis trackers along with inverters and transformers, 34.5 kV collection system, access roads and standard perimeter fencing, project substation of the solar array, and an O&M building. The battery energy storage system will be comprised of lithium-ion or equivalent technology batteries with outdoor rated containers, along with inverters and medium voltage transformers, a project substation at the BESS area as well. And then finally, as mentioned previously, the gen tie is approximately 0.8 miles between the BESS area and the substation. And the project is actually slated to avoid all floodplains. The project phases are industry standard as well. All the pre-construction activities will include all of our environmental studies, including cultural and biological surveys and other baseline studies, engineering studies such as geotechnical and site engineering surveys and site design, as well as the full suite of federal, state, and local permitting, including NEPA. Construction is estimated to take up to 2 years. Construction would employ best management practices and design features to minimize impacts. We anticipate a workforce of anywhere between 400 and 500 workers per day, 800 to 1,000 daily workforce trips, and up to 100 trips per day for delivery of equipment and materials during that two-year span. The water demand is estimated to be about 200 acre feet, and that is mainly for dust suppression. The operations and maintenance phase, 30 plus years. Activities include access for periodic inspections and maintenance. The workforce is anticipated to be no more than 5 full-time equivalent positions, and the water demand is relatively low with less than 5 acre feet per year, estimated to be needed for panel washing in the facilities themselves. So moving on to the affected resources and issues that were identified in the VFAR. This first graphic is just, it demonstrates the project site relative to other management areas in the region. As shown, we avoid the ACEC, wilderness areas, reservations, and military land, but it gives you a good idea about where this project is sited relative to the other areas in the region. Moving on to wildlife. The majority of the project sites characterized as creosote flats with areas of mesquite and ephemeral drainages. As previously mentioned, we avoid the ACEC wilderness areas. We avoid national monuments, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service critical habitat. We avoid important bird areas, Pinal County riparian areas, and most suitable habitat for Sonoran desert tortoise, mapped as Category 2. So you can see in the graphic to the right, the green polygons are the areas that BLM has mapped as Category 2 desert tortoise habitat. We've pulled our project site as far west as possible to avoid as much of that Category 2 habitat as possible. There are a couple of washes on either side of the site, the Bechtel and Waterman wash. Those are left intact to allow for wildlife movement around the site. And then according to the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agency's Crucial Habitat Assessment Tool, or CHAT, most of the site is designated as level 6 CHAT ranking, which is defined as the least crucial for species conservation. We didn't find any suitable habitat for bald golden eagles, California least tern, yellow-billed cuckoo, or monarch butterfly in our desktop analysis, but there was suitable habitat on site for burrowing owl and Sonoran pronghorn. So we'll continue to coordinate closely with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Arizona Game and Fish during the planning and NEPA processes. It's also important to note that the project is not within the 10J reintroduction area for the pronghorn experimental population. So if the project is approved to proceed with NEPA, we'll continue to coordinate with BLM, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and Arizona Game and Fish on species protections. We'll also work to develop and implement appropriate avoidance and minimization measures through the NEPA process. The project will closely follow the 2007 recommended standard mitigation measures for projects in Sonoran desert tortoise habitat and the 2009 burrowing owl project clearance guidance for landowners. A class 1 desktop review was performed for the project site for cultural resources and within a 1-mile buffer. Records show that 13 surveys were conducted within the project site, and 15 surveys have previously been conducted within 1 mile of the project site. The project is located near but outside of 3 surrounding tribal communities listed here on the slide. And if the project is approved to proceed with the NEPA process, we will conduct Class 3 pedestrian cultural surveys to identify any sensitive resources on site and develop the appropriate avoidance and mitigation measures. The BLM office will also consult with interested tribes to determine the presence of traditional cultural properties, resources in or near the project site. Related to grazing, so the project site extends into 780 acres of the BLM Palo Verde Mountains grazing allotment and 800 acres of the Conley grazing allotment. And per BLM's grazing regulations, BLM would notify permittees at least 2 years in advance of any proposed change in the allotment. It's important to note recent conversations with the BLM grazing specialist. It was confirmed there are no active permits on our site. Nonetheless, we are considering truncating the northern tip of the project to allow cattle to move up and around that mountain range directly to the east of the project site. So if you can see my cursor here, this kind of narrow strip of the project area, we're considering kind of chopping that off so we maintain that movement up and around the mountain range directly to the east. And again, if the project is approved to proceed with NEPA, we will do a detailed evaluation of impacts on rangeland resources, including impacts from fencing, access to water and water rights, traffic management or relocation of range improvements, and also development of measures to avoid, minimize, and mitigate impacts where needed. On to water resources. So the project site contains unnamed ephemeral drainages, no wetlands, perennial streams, intermittent streams, or Zone A floodplains located on the project site. None of the drainages are mapped as outstanding Arizona waters or Section 303D listed waters, nor is it within a 1/4 mile of regulated features. Additionally, there are no Pinal County riparian areas mapped on the site. However, if the project is approved to proceed with NEPA, a formal delineation will be conducted to collect drainage data, and an approved jurisdictional determination will be sought from the Army Corps per the most recent ruling. Notifications will be made as required to the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality for non-waters of the U.S. And then applicable measures to avoid more significant drainages will be incorporated into the project design. Land use and recreation. So there are existing distribution and transmission lines that run north-south along directly west of the project site. All BLM administered lands within the project site are managed as VRM Class 4, designated to allow major modification of the existing landscape. No special recreation management areas, lands containing wilderness characteristics, or known mining claims occur within the project site. The Juan de Anza National Historic Trail and ACECs are located directly north, but they are avoided by the project site. The Sonoran Desert National Monument is over 2 miles to the west, and the Box Canyon Recreation Area overlaps the southeast corner of the site and is used for shooting activities with a campground but it's located just outside of the site boundaries. And again, if the project is approved to proceed with the NEPA process, visual simulations would be prepared to assess changes to the existing landscape character and scenic quality, and appropriate measures to minimize land use impacts will be identified and developed during the NEPA process. Then finally, this kind of lays out the preliminary schedule for development. As you can see, we are in the variance process right now, estimated to take about 6 months to complete. Our resource studies, so that's all of your environmental studies, biocultural and whatnot, will take about 12 months to complete, estimated to finish in the spring of 2025. NEPA compliance estimated to about 12 months, spring 2026, estimated completion date, with construction starting in the fall of 2026, taking about 2 years for a commercial operation date, winter 2028. So if BLM approves the project to move forward, BLM will initiate the NEPA process, including additional opportunities for public agency and tribal input. I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Dallas. All right, so same drill as before. If you got questions, you can type them into the Q&A box. You could type them over into the chat, or give us a wave with reactions and we'll call you out and bring you out off of mute. All right, we got one in the chat here. Oh, that's just a direct message to me. All right, not hearing any right now. We will have some time to come back around to this, but let's go ahead and call back Megan and Toby to talk about the other Primergy project, Thistle Solar, and this is in the Hassayampa field office up in the northern areas of the Phoenix District, up by Wickenburg. So Yavapai County here. So go ahead and take it away, guys.
Yeah, and we'll skip the initial introductory slides. They're the same as they were for the yellow cups, as well as the construction related slides. And we'll focus just on the project specific aspects. So Thistle proposes to develop the project within the unincorporated Yavapai County. The project is approximately 22 miles northwest of Wickenburg and 10 miles north of the town of Aguila. And similar to yellow cups, this is proposed for up to 500 megawatts of PV, as well as 500 megawatts of battery energy storage. And this one is planned to tie into the Wapa Meade to Perkins line, which is approximately 4.8 miles away, and via a 500 kV generation tie line. And the project is proposed on up to 8,200 acres of BLM administered land, with 6,800 of them being on RETA, or Renewable Energy Development Area land. And the Gentie will pass through land administered by the Arizona State Land.
Thanks, Toby. And we want to provide a quick overview of the solar history of this project area because it's a little unique. So the Thistle Solar Project is currently proposed encompassing the entirety of a preliminary alternative provided, put forth in the draft PEIS of the Western Solar Plan that was published in 2012, that Derek mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. And it was referred to as the Bullard Wash Solar Energy Zone because there's a large wash that's at about a half a mile south of the southern boundary of this project area. This was presented as a potential alternative by the BLM in the draft EIS. Now, as a reminder, a solar energy zone is defined by the BLM as an area with few impediments to solar energy production of solar energy. Similar to what Derek mentioned, it's an area where it's pretty suitable for solar. Now, between draft and final of the EIS, the BLM conducted a site visit and conducted, or actually, this is prior to the draft. BLM conducted a site visit to each SCZ, including this one, and conducted an extensive effort to evaluate existing data on a number of resources, as well as analyses of air quality impacts, analyses of ecological impacts, etc. So the ultimate, what ultimately happened to the Bullard Wash SCZ was that it was dropped from consideration in the final programmatic EIS, the one that was published in 2012. Due to the potential impacts that were evaluated in the draft EIS. The BLM determined that it was not suitable for designation as a solar energy zone under their existing criteria due to some resource concerns, which include presence of unique plant assemblages, which we will get into later in this presentation, concerns regarding wildlife habitat, and visual concerns associated with the Trace Alamos Wilderness area, which is about 4 miles north of the Thistle Solar area, local residences, and then visitors traveling along Route 98. Now, about approximately 9 miles of Route 98, which is not shown in this map, it's a few, probably about 2 miles to the east of this extent, is designated, this is an official designation, as the Joshua Tree Scenic Road. And we will get to this later in the presentation. As well as concerns regarding interference with military operations if structure heights exceed 250 feet. There are 2 military training routes that do not cross this project area, but they are located in the region. However, there are no proposed structures associated with the Thistle Solar Project that would come close to exceeding 250 feet, as well as groundwater use concerns. So following up the 2012 decision that dropped the Bullard Wash SCZ, the BLM undertook the RDEP, which Derek also mentioned earlier in this presentation, which was published in January 2013. Now, the RDEP designated a portion of the project area as a REDA. REDAs are identified as areas that had a low likelihood of resource conflicts, and the REDA on this map is shown in red. And the Bullard Wash SEZ is shown in the blue hashing. And then as a note regarding the ongoing revision or update to the 2012 PEIS, which is the updated Western Solar Plan, where a decision may be anticipated at some point this year. Under all of the draft alternatives that were presented, this project area associated with the region around the Thistle Solar Project area, my apologies, is classified as available for solar application under all alternatives. Of course, as we see here with the original 2012 PEIS, a lot can change between draft and final. So moving forward to resources, we're going to skip through much of these in the interest of time. I don't know, Toby, did you want to say anything about schedule?
No, I mean, it's similar to what we just covered for Yellow Cups as far as timing and assumptions. I think, assuming once we get past the variance process, that's when the NEPA would start, and that's when we would get into some of the slides you're going to cover. But our assumed timeline right now is construction between 2026 and 2028, with commercial operations expected in 2028.
Okay, great. Thanks, Toby. Okay, moving on towards resources. So these resources that we're evaluating are the same as we discussed for Yellow Cups, with the exception of visual resources. We'll kind of touch on Joshua Tree Scenic, the Joshua Tree Scenic Parkway, in a further slide, but currently the visual resource management classifications for the BLM administered lands in the Thistle Solar Project area are VRM Class 4, which a couple of these presentations have touched on, allows for major modifications. Therefore, there are no conflicts with the current VRM classification of the project area, and it is not included in this presentation. The resource analyses are the same as we discussed for Yellow Cups. We do have a couple overview photographs of the project area on the slide, so I wanted to pause for just a moment. Moving on to livestock grazing, this project area is located within portions of 4 grazing allotments administered by the BLM and Arizona State Land Department. Unlike Yellow Cups, this one's a little different because the proposed project area intersects, the solar facility portion intersects 3 different grazing allotments. It isn't entirely located within a single one. Therefore, our percentage estimates are representative of worst case scenario for each allotment. So that is if all of the 7,061 acres would be located exactly within each allotment. So the ultimate design will likely cross portions of all of these allotments if the variance is approved. So worst case estimation is that up to 20% of the pipeline ranch, 17% of the Central Arizona Ranch Company, and up to 10% of the 4-plot allotment may be occupied by the solar facility and associated infrastructure that, as mentioned before, would need to be fenced and therefore preclude livestock use. The proposed Gentai corridor would cross portions of Pipeline Ranch and Date Creek, but again, as discussed earlier, really there would be no use limitations associated with that outside of temporary disturbance and loss of forage until it returns, so likely less than 1%. I think we're all familiar that the BLM has to notify permittees at least 2 years in advance, as well as what needs to be done with grazing infrastructure. There is 2 existing earthen stock tanks present within the proposed project area, as well as fencing and other range infrastructure. Regarding land use and recreation, very similar to Yellow Cups, land use is primarily livestock grazing and dispersed recreation within the project area. In the general area, there is transmission and transportation associated with existing transmission lines and mining. So there's certainly mining claims in the region. There is no mining claims within the project area. The project area doesn't contain developed or designated recreation sites, but it is located within a BLM extensive recreation management area, which is a type of special recreation management area that in this case manages for dispersed recreation. The type of dispersed recreation that occurs in this area is off-road vehicle driving on primitive roads, and then other types of activities like horseback riding, camping, hiking, recreational target shooting, hunting, etc. In addition to the Joshua Tree Scenic Parkway, which we do have a screenshot from Google Earth taken from the portion of Route 93 looking towards the proposed project area at like an aspect that you would probably get the greatest view of it. And from the highway, you really can't even see the transmission line that the proposed project would interconnect to, and then the solar facility would be so that's probably a mile or 2 miles out into the distance, and then the solar facility would be another 4 miles back beyond there. So maybe potentially unlikely to view it from the highway, but again, a detailed analysis would be required in order to evaluate that in more detail, as well as some field work. Roads adjacent to the proposed project area, such as Alamo Road, are popular loop routes for recreational off-vehicle highway driving. Now, Alamo Road provides access off of State Route 93 towards the west and follows the northern boundary of the proposed project area and the Gentai corridor. Alamo Road is also a popular sort of backcountry route that you can access Alamo State Park approximately 30 miles west of the proposed project area. It's sort of a backcountry dirt roadway you can access in State Park if you don't want to take the highway. Again, detailed evaluation of impacts to dispersed recreation, public access, experience, and land use would be conducted during the NEPA analysis. Regarding vegetation and surface water, as alluded to earlier, the project area is in an interesting vegetation area. It is a transition zone between Mojave Desert Scrub and Sonoran Desert Scrub biotic communities. So that is represented here. For example, we've got a photo of a saguaro and a Joshua tree kind of next to each other. These sort of ecotonal transition zones have representative vegetation from both the Sonoran Desert and the Mojave Desert, and it's just a unique combination of vegetation. As noted, one BLM special status species may occur, or it's known to occur, it's Joshua tree. In addition to that species, there are 9 species protected under the Arizona Native Plant Law documented within the proposed project area, including saguaro cacti. One noxious weed has been documented within the project area, Saharan mustard, and obviously mitigation and monitoring associated with avoiding the spread or further spread of that species as a result of construction activities and operations would be incorporated, and it would need to be addressed in the NEPA analysis. Surface water is very similar to yellow cups within the project area, consist of earth and stock tanks, two stock tanks, and then unnamed ephemeral drainages. All of these drainages generally flow to the southwest to Bullard Wash, which is the larger wash in this region, approximately half mile to the southwest. And then there are about 532 acres of the project area that is located within a floodplain, which obviously, as we mentioned before, would be avoided with the exception of access roads and collection lines. Similar to yellow cups, impacts to vegetation would be reduced to the greatest extent possible by minimizing the footprint, design considerations, low impact construction methods. Vegetation and species specific surveys would be conducted, and then avoidance mitigation and monitoring strategies would be developed utilizing the results of those pre-NEPA baseline studies with the BLM during the NEPA process, if any of them would potentially be impacted or would need to be avoided. Regarding wildlife, this project area contains a portion of the Maricopa County Harkuvar Mountains, Vulture Mountains Wildlife Landscape Movement area. You can see that here in yellow on the map. This has been identified for mule deer and Sonoran Desert Tortoise. There is Sonoran Desert Tortoise Category 3 habitat located not within the project area. It's actually south of Bullard Wash up towards those mountains, as you can see in the figure. However, the proximity of desert tortoise habitat, category habitat indicates that the species could be present, certainly could potentially disperse in some of these areas. It also contains suitable habitat for monarch butterfly. And then just as I mentioned, the saguaro and Joshua tree do provide habitat for numerous species, including BLM special status species and nesting birds. In addition to monarch butterfly and Sonoran Desert Tortoise, there are 7 other BLM special status wildlife species that may occur in the project area. Impacts to wildlife habitat, including saguaro cacti and Joshua tree, and movement corridors would be reduced to the greatest extent possible, utilizing the methodologies that we've been discussing. Similar to vegetation, species-specific surveys would be conducted, and then the results of those would go into avoidance mitigation or monitoring strategies developed with the BLM, Game and Fish, other wildlife agencies as necessary. Now, regarding cultural resources, only approximately 2% of the project area has been previously surveyed. Within that 2%, there are 2 archaeological or historic sites that have been identified. So again, as mentioned before, it is likely that additional cultural sites may be present within the project area in the areas that have not been surveyed. One of these cultural sites, or one of these historic sites, is Alamo Row, which we have reviewed on earlier slides. The other one is an archaeological site. Neither of these sites have been evaluated for their National Register of Historic Places eligibility, so that is an additional step that would need to be taken to evaluate them. And similarly, initial consultation with interested tribes has been initiated, and the BLM will continue to engage in Section 106 consultation throughout the NEPA process if the variance is approved. And a sampling survey strategy would be developed in preparation for NEPA, and the full survey of the project footprint would be conducted. The results of that survey would inform any avoidance mitigation and monitoring strategies during NEPA, as well as any feedback received during the Section 106 consultation process regarding any potential sacred sites or traditional cultural properties that are not necessarily associated with archaeological sites that can be located. And we'll open it up to some questions.
All right, thanks again, Megan. Do have a couple of questions that came in already, and I'm going to take them live. So I have a question from Kevin and a question from Laura. So the questions are similar, and they're about the Joshua trees. So Kevin asked, do Joshua trees have a protected status in Arizona? They are a Arizona native plant that enjoys protections by the Arizona Department of Agriculture. And Laura asks, essentially, what would happen to Joshua trees if they were if solar was to be developed over top Joshua trees. So again, kind of like the question that popped up earlier about microfill woodlands and saguaros, don't have a good inventory out there yet of just how vegetation communities would be impacted. Although we do know that there are Joshua tree specimens there. The Arizona Native Plant Law, much like just, I guess you could say, a lot of sort of civil laws and land use laws, does not translate to federal land. In other words, the state is not going to sue the federal government for not following its law. That's just kind of a constitutional issue there. But BLM does acknowledge that law and acknowledges the importance of these vegetation communities to wildlife and into the communities. In previous projects where we've had impacts of Joshua trees in particular, and saguaros, I believe, but Joshua trees I've seen, there's a salvage that goes on where Joshua trees are removed from the project area, kept alive and replanted, either with in vegetation efforts, revegetation efforts of disturbed areas, or they will be transferred to another place and replanted. So that's one thing that can be done. I unfortunately am not an expert on how good those salvage operations go. I know both saguaros and Joshua trees are pretty sensitive to where they actually germinate and grow, and I don't think that salvage is always gives them the best chance, but it does give them a chance to kind of survive. Regardless, you know, those impacts would be disclosed in NEPA. We would have to survey for those communities and you know, and make a plan as how we're going to deal with that vegetation. So a little premature and not a whole lot to go on, but like I said, we do have some precedent in working through salvage for saguaros and Joshua trees. Another question that came through here from Marcel. I'll read it for everyone. It was mentioned that this project did not move forward after the Bullard Wash SEZ PEIS was completed, but the project area is included as open for solar application in the draft solar PEIS. Will the decision to move this project forward come after the completion of this current solar PEIS and RMPA? It's a good question, Marcel, and let me maybe try to break this down a little bit so that alphabet soup doesn't fly over people's heads. So this project as a project, it was not proposed until just recently. The solar energy zone, if you will, the kind of zone within the plan, had been put forward in the draft EIS back in 2012 and then was removed. So a project has not been proposed here in the past. I guess you could say the solar energy zone became a decision for that decision maker, which, you know, these programmatics are really BLM leadership at that level, to take that out. And in other words, not just automatically greenlight it for solar energy development and leave it in this variance area. Megan confirmed that because of the proximity to the transmission lines and the low likelihood of resource conflict, it appears that this area would be available for solar development under all alternatives of the new solar PEIS. So in other words, the proposed project would not be out of conformance But as Megan also noted, a lot can always change. So this is available right now under the regulations that we're working with. If those were to change, and that's an if, because we only have a draft out that is still open for comment for a couple more days, there's still a decision pending on that, and we don't know where exactly that decision will land. But we do have a preferred alternative. We do have an idea of where leadership is leaning towards the plan, and it appears that this project would be in conformance with that. So hopefully that helps you out a little bit. And Kevin, how long since the RMP has been updated? Oh gosh, we have somebody from the Phoenix district who can quickly tell me the vintage of the RMP in that area. It's a scramble right now. Somebody's working behind the scenes.
I think it was 2008, but I'm not from the BLM.
Okay.
I'm Derek, I'm looking it up on e-planning right now.
Okay. One thing to bring up, and this question came from Kevin, is that regardless of when the RMP was updated, the it is sort of like your base of decisions. Essentially, when was the RMP published? They're constantly being amended. And the amendments essentially overwrite or fill in gaps that were in the RMP. So I don't believe that the 2008 RMP had any decisions related to solar energy development. And so as far as any decisions pertaining to solar and where it's allowed and under what conditions, that would be 2013 with RDEP was the last time that RMP was updated specifically for solar. But in terms of other amendments out there, Chris is helping us out with that right now.
So it looks like the Bradshaw-Hockwahena resource management plan is covered under, would cover the Hassayampa field office, and that was 2009. There was also, those would be, there might have been an amendment in 2017 associated with the Vulture Mountains Recreation and Public Purposes Act.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. All right, I have another question from Laura. Will BLM delay these variance reviews until after the Western Solar Plan revision and PEIS record of decision is signed? A lot has changed since 22. Laura, it's the short answer is like kind of no. We can't really put all business on hold pending the outcome of a plan that we don't know. It's a planning process, and it'll reach a decision. It could very well not reach a decision. It could take years to reach a decision. And that kind of uncertainty would really lock us up on a lot of decisions. And this goes for any of our decisions in any of those programmatic plans, whether it's solar, sage grouse planting in other parts of the country, fuel breaks, vegetation management, you name it. So we always have to work with the plans that we've got. There's a big question out there, and this is just to inform everybody, that what about so-called legacy projects that get started under one set of planning regimes, and there's a new decision that comes along in the middle of that project consideration and permitting. That decision has not been made yet. That will be a part of any record of decision that's issued with the solar PEIS. We had a question come up earlier when we were talking to agencies tonight or this morning. And usually the way you look at that is like, there's a easy question of like, is the project in or out? Is it allowed or not allowed? And so would a project that's allowed now, but maybe not be allowed under a future decision still be allowed, or would that project become essentially a dead project? So that's one question that would need to be answered. And the other question would be, okay, so let's say the project's going to be allowed regardless. What about the rules, essentially? Are there special design features or, like I said, sort of structures that we've got in RDEP that would continue from 2012, or would the new plan displace those and take a project that, again, is moving forward and say, well, you got to do things a little bit different. You're allowed, but you got to do things a little bit different. So that's the second part of the question. And I do not have answers to that question. That will lie with the decision maker when that decision maker is prepared to issue a ROD. So all I can say is stay tuned, and you have a couple more days to comment on that solar PEIS, and that question right there is a very hot question by everybody involved in this, whether it's industry, conservation groups, citizens, and even staff here at BLM. We'd all want to know. But in the meantime, we forge ahead. And I do want to note that we're over time, but I'm willing to stick around if there are any lingering questions about Thistle, or if there are any go backs to other projects, Yellow Cups or TAP. And while I wait, I just typed into the chat, if you open up your little chat box, the link to the e-planning site. So if you want to click on this and bookmark that, put it in your search history, whatever it is that you do to find a website, that is where you'll go to get the information on these projects. And like I said, we've got some information up there. We'll be updating some of that information here very shortly. We'll put the video up here. Please share this with your coworkers and your colleagues, your neighbors, your friends, anybody who may have an interest in this, and get the word out. So still open for questions here, a little bit longer.
Popped another one into the chat. It's very.
Yes. The question is, an RMP amendment could also consider a conservation, solar exclusion, or ACEC alternative. So anytime you undertake a planning process, you do have to open up to nominations, if you will, and declare if there's going to be nominations for something like ACECs or areas of critical environmental concern. Solar exclusions as well is kind of on the table. The planning criteria in a big planning process really sort of outlines the decision space, if you will, the terms of the plan amendment and what's going to be considered. I believe, and I'm not a project manager for the National Solar PEIS, but I believe they were not accepting ACEC nominations as part of that planning process. So I don't know how that is being addressed. I do know that some people were nominating some ACECs in there, and that will be something that needs to get addressed again in the plan and following a decision, any protest to that plan. For other things like conservation easements, solar exclusions, I believe that those were all captured in alternatives of the plan themselves. So pretty fundamental to the plan there. You know, would solar be allowed? Would it not? Are there avoidance areas or some other designations that would go into that? And the solar PEIS has considered some of that right now. And that solar PEIS would be a west-wide programmatic amendment. So yeah, it would amend every RMP in BLM in the West, everything but the eastern states. So that is a very big and heavy piece of policy that they're working through right now. And like I said, we got some alternatives out there and still open for comments for a couple more days on that. Well, before we get out of here, I also just want to give a shout out to all the BLM staff that has been with us tonight in the background, listening to your questions, being available if you needed to ask a question about a particular specialty. We have range managers here, so with specialty in grazing and botany and range conservation, wildlife biologists, archaeologists, and even management. So they've all been listening. They've all been following your questions, and I want to give a shout out to them for their support behind the scenes. If you do have other questions or things that are on your mind, feel free to send them my way, and I can get you in touch with any of our specialists to discuss that in a little bit more detail. But barring any more questions, what I will do is call this meeting to a close and leave you all to your own devices here to review these plans on your own and get us some questions. So, or get us some comments. May 15th is the deadline. Please email them over.
Thank you, Derek.
Thanks, Derek.
Thanks, Derek.
You got it. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone. Have a nice night.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Derek.